all of you. We welcome you back to this session called Green Economy. And well, since the economy not only creates good things but also bad things, at least the way we're organized in this world, we say, us economists, that we are organized in the best way possible hitherto when it comes to efficiency in the use of resources. But of course it's a world in which we need to fix a lot of things. Many of the things that happened with our seas, with our rivers, with our ecosystems, with the biodiversity, the problems we have with the atmosphere, of course, are linked to the economic sector. They have to do as well with the way we are producing, also with the way we are consuming. They have to do, of course, with the productivity with which we are using the resources available to us from the planet. And if the financial or economic tasks, and we don't have any way to solve these requirements in a massive way under the terms of basic needs and not so basic needs, the well-being, comfort, there's no other way of solving it other than a series of things like the ones we have when it comes to organization in the workplace, division in the work, from the times of Adam Smith when he was operating these matters. And the truth is that nowadays economists, they seem to be more clear on the fact that the natural environment is something that has to be considered in a notion of open economy, and that these impacts the economic development has on nature, not only when it comes to extraction, but also the negative aspects of some things, is something that has to be considered, of course. And well, now we will talk about green economy. Green economy is a new paradigm which is turning into a paradigm for the future, a paradigm that maybe got here to stay. So to talk about this topic, the experts we have this evening are first Carlos Chandubi. He has a PhD in advanced materials. He has a diploma course in economics and international relationships. He went to the School of Economics in London. He is currently the chief of the program of the experience of administration of projects and administration of knowledge, quality, and environment for Latin America and the Caribbean. Dr. Chanduvi Suarez has more than 25 years expertise working with the public sectors. He has undertaken several positions in the organizations for the industrial development of the United Nations. He's a licensed auditor for quality, and he's an administrator for the European Association for Quality. He's an administrator for the regional project indicator of green growth, cooperation between the OECD and the United Nations. We also have Rodolfo Godínez Rosales. He has a PhD in environmental law, and he studied in the National University in Mexico and has a master's degree on the same specialty in the University of London. He has undertaken courses in the Department of State in the United States in Washington, D.C., the Institute of the United Nations for the Professional Education in Budapest, Hungary, in The Hague in the Netherlands as well, the University of the East in Finland, and the Organization for Carbon in Madrid. He has also undertaken activities in several academic centers, such as the UNAM, the Instituto Politécnico Nacional, the Universities Iberoamericana, Panamericana, Colmex, National Institute of Public Administration, and the Center of Administration for the Sustainable Development of the country. He's currently a director of the environment for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we will have two very interesting perspectives. Dr. Chandubi will talk about a very concrete example from Korea, South Korea. And Mr. Godínez will talk about what Mexico is doing in the global environment to push through with a more sustainable development plan. First, we will give the floor to Dr. Chandubi. Well, good afternoon. I'd like to thank INEGI for the opportunity of sharing these 20 minutes with you. And to start, I would like to make a couple of observations. The topic of green economy is, or green economics is something that is not completely, it doesn't have a consensus in Latin America. Some countries look at the green topic, green economics, something that's used very indiscriminately. There's green industry, green steel, green companies, and some countries see a barrier, which is a commerce barrier. In the UNIDO, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, we manage matters of economics, productivity, and human rights. So we integrate these three activities, and we look at the sustainable development in a more holistic way. So we have tried to define green economics mainly to avoid, due to semantics and terminology, as the efficient use of the resources that are available to us in order to optimize all the activities we undertake, and we undertake in a productive, sustainable, environmentally friendly way, and also socially friendly way, and which is fair for all the participants. So today, I think the reason I was invited by INEGI is that we have worked together in a regional project of green indicators. And the information, the treatment of the data, the illustration of how to make information available for the for all the people who are responsible of the strategies. I think we agree with the INEGI. And I also like to talk to you about the experience we've had with the OECD. And an experience of a country that has taken very seriously the growth. They really agreed on green economics. They call it green growth. And the initiative we have with the UNIDO, the OECD, and of course INEGI. So this is kind of the route map I'm going to talk about. So first, we're going to talk about resources. We always talk about resources. I was listening to the presentation today, and well, in these 2 days I've seen tremendous innovations that lead us to better usage of resources, both at governmental level, human resources, and financial resources. And I would like to start with this chart from a McKinsey study that was undertaken in 2012, in which he calculated that only through efficiency programs, resource efficiency programs, usage of information, in organizational innovation, better programs at a working level, we can obtain 2.3 trillion US dollars, doing what we're doing, but doing it properly. That without the value of the technological innovation and inventiveness, like we've seen today in the geospatial industry. So with this foundation, we decided to define green growth, which is just the efficient use of human resources, of the economic resources, productive resources, natural resources, and socio-cultural resources, is to promote harmony of the human being with his or her nature and their environment. So I think with this definition, we avoid in Latin America many discussions on the concept of green, or what is green. And with this perspective, we have been working with the OECD, and we have to measure the efficiency of resources and how the public sector, all the people in this sector are performing. So we have to measure the efficiency in planning and articulation and the efficiency of the productive chains at a national level. So we are talking about the governmental environment and in the industry and for all the people that are involved. I don't know if you know the balance scorecard from Norden, which is an analysis instrument, and it's very similar, because we look at the policy as the orientation, our goal, but we have the asset or the resources, what is available to us. We look at how we use these resources. We study the elements of society that allow us to channel competitiveness and the way these resources are used with innovation and the impact they have on the human being, and the environment and health. So with this if we have this perspective, we can have a broad view of what's going on with the economy. Can you hear me now? Okay, so with these 4 elements, we started working with INEGI, where we handle the metadata, which is the data in all sectors. And that's why INEGI has been one of the optimal partners we have in Mexico. So this is the methodology made by the OECD, and the people who want to know about it more in depth, you can look for it online. It's called Green Growth, and there's a lot of information in English, Spanish. There's several articles about green growth from the OECD. While trying to identify the dynamics of the economy, if we know that this is the efficiency of resources, the dynamics of this with competitiveness, productivity of the society, to use resources in an efficient way in order to give all the stakeholders a benefit for their natural environment. So this methodology was discussed in the OECD for about a year, and in 2011 it was approved by the member countries of the OECD as a way of measuring their development in green growth. However, some conditions were set, because from the statistics standpoint, I'm not a statistics person, but I work with numbers. So we always have the intention. Of course, the best thing is to validate the information and to make it even, uniform, to measure and to compare. In the OECD, they said, okay, the information we have will not be for any kind of comparison. It will be just to measure our performance. So let's agree on 4 groups of measures, and we will leave the indicators, the matrices, and the freedom for each country to use the resources available to them, the information available to them, but grouping at a meta level in these 4 sectors. In this way, they achieved this evenness in the European disparity. You say, okay, so the country said, yes, if we have a meta level of information, we will be able to measure our growth, we will be able to reach a consensus, and we will be able to have a joint political action. So with this, based on this principle, and they didn't make the mistake from the political standpoint, this is a mistake of trying to standardize the individual measures. There's similar efforts going on in Latin America that have a solid academic value, but in Latin America, they have tried to standardize all the indicators throughout the region. Can you imagine 33 countries discussing on how to measure a certain resource? So it's been 10 years, and in 10 years, after very hard work, they have achieved an agreement in 13 environmental indicators. So it's a process that's pretty complex, that led to political discussions. And the thing here is, ladies and gentlemen, we want to work, we want to develop ourselves, we want to measure what we're doing. So let's talk about efficiency, let's talk about metadata, and we can work. So the OECD suggested the 4 groups of indicators. They presented examples for complete indicators, and thus they started working in the characteristics, and the characteristics were approved by 34 member countries. This is support for the elaboration of policies at a national level. It reflects national characteristics. They're based on existent assets. They have an emphasis on communication of the indicators. This morning I have been talking about how to make the information useful for the political level. It has to be evident. Maybe if in the future we do it with cartography, or with cyber cartography, it would be good, but first it has to be done in a way that we can work with it, and it's a management instrument. So I measure what I want to measure, the way I want to measure it, because I want to make some progress. So this exercise, in this exercise, Korea is one of the countries that uses it on an ongoing basis. They have an example of growth and harmony with the nature, and I'm going to talk briefly about the experience in Korea, and then a few words about the regional experience that we've had with INEGI. So Korea's policy, of course, they have a very well-structured program. They have a participative society. They summon all the society, and they define strategic plans in which all the stakeholders take part. So they wanted to measure also the performance of the methodology they promoted, of course, and they were the pioneers in the OECD. So green growth in Korea, they measure it every 5 years. They measure ecological growth. They talk about the efficiency of the resources, and this is checked every 5 years, and it's monitored on an ongoing basis, and this is the main characteristic for Korea. So they used this methodology, they adapted it to their contextual conditions, and it was obviously led or spearheaded by the president, but the entire society is committed with these indicators, so committed to this indicator. So there's institutional alliances looking for organizational efficiency, and all the institutions work together. In this way, they are already saving resources, very important resources, in the way they work. And the structure, well, what I wanted to say is what the OECD methodology does, even though it does not determine conditions for the indicators, what it does do is it tries to kind of standardize the national report. So the reports from the countries are structured. The information that is given at national level has a methodology. There's a schema, a certain format for the report, and each indicator has to have an explanatory format, how to measure it, and what is the impact, and what's the interpretation. So each report has the introduction, the context, and it has the division, like the one I'm talking about. And in this way, at a political level, we have a homogeneous or standardized level, and in a more micro way, we have an instrument to work. And here we're measuring the productivity of the resource. Here we have emission, energy, material, water. We have the base of the assets. Right now they started with the environmental section mainly. They started with quality of life. And they measure the trend of this indicator that has been defined by them. And of course there's a more thorough work to produce these summaries. They have the political opportunities and answers. Here we see R&D on the green side, green technology, environment, cost, and they look at the trends in which they have to react. So they define their indicators. All in these four groups of work. There's several countries in the region that do it in a different way, but in the end we are talking about the same topics. So within this concept, with the UNIDO, the OECD, and the CAF, we carried out this project in Latin America, and we invited 7 countries: Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Guatemala, Mexico, Paraguay, and Peru, in which this methodology was introduced. We did it fast because of the conditions of the indicators, which were, like I said, we standardized the diversity, and all the countries were quite dynamic. In this case, the UNIDO, since we are the non-productive body of the United Nations, one of the main things we achieved is that when we're talking about green economy, we're not only leave this to environmentalists, but we get the industry, the Ministry of Industry, and the entire society involved. In the case of Costa Rica, for instance, the central bank, the Ministry of the Industry, the Ministry of the Environment, and a series of stakeholders work together for these indicators. And the instrument has already been approved. We're still working. And this year we have also had diverse economies, like even when the political framework is not standardized, like Bolivia, Venezuela. They have participated and they will participate in this strategy because all the 4 groups of indicators allow us to adapt it to their policies. In the case of Bolivia, one of the most important indicators, of course, is human and environmental impact, and in some other countries it's more about competitiveness. But in this way we continue to move forward in a homogeneous way to keep walking towards sustainable growth and an efficient economy. This was a meeting, and we've met in France, Paraguay, Caracas, and the initiative today, since we're expanding it, we will be 10 countries. And with INEGI, once we have achieved the consensus at a large scale, we are working with INEGI on some instruments that are more specific to validate some of the observations of the countries, of the remarks of the countries. We started from the more general to the more specific, and we will help and improve the measures of the statistics, or how to group the information and how to verify it. And this year, well, this was started in 2012. The second report will come out this year, and we will be the reference from the indicators they measured. So in this way, us as the UNIDO, we have tried to use the information to work with specialized institutions such as the INEGI to socialize the information in such a way that all the stakeholders in society are able to work towards a sustainable growth, more in tune and in harmony with nature, trying to avoid the discussion that's created when we catalog or say or label something green. So in the UNIDO, we work on the efficiency of resources with instruments that are being introduced slowly to integrate the decision makers. So I think the indicators are just the beginning, because our main objective is the productive transformation in Latin America and the Caribbean based on an efficient use of resources. So what else? The ideas we're talking about is we're reviewing the success in Korea, the social, organizational, natural resources, to work them in a very efficient way. And obviously I just got here from Colombia. We've been talking on the articulation of the productive sector as a way of improving the use of financial and human resources available in the country. So in this way, in Latin America, we want to, using the example of Korea, we want to continue to work and to follow their growth in the last 20 years, and slowly using the measurement instrument and standardizing these indicators, and to help and support the region to improve their productivity, their economic performance, and to grow in a way that's in harmony with the environment. So that's it for me. So I'm available if you have any questions, and I would like to thank you for your attention. We'd like to thank Dr. Chandubi, and now we will give the floor to Dr. Rodolfo Godínez.
Good afternoon, and thank you for your invitation. I'm going to talk about green economy as well. I have a presentation. I don't know if it's possible to show it. We need to set some background before going into green economy. I understand that you're all specialists in the environment, so some things you will find repetitive. But you know that environment is a modern subject. In the 70s, the first conference in 1972 in Stockholm, that's where the subject was popularized. The conference in Stockholm in 72 gave us some basic principles, a declaration which is still patrimony, and now we know it, the UN Environment section in Nairobi. This was 40 years ago. This evolves. In Rio 92, we have another conference, the Rio Summit, and where we again have a statement. We have Agenda 21, something more specific, and for the first time, documents that were adopted in a summit, in this case, in the Commission for Climate Change and the Commission for Biodiversity in 92. There's another convention for desertification in 1994 linked to Rio, and there are 3 mechanisms that are present since the 90s. 20 years later, and this is the first slide, in Rio Plus 20 in 2012, we have another summit. In this summit, which I must say, it wasn't as good, because the concepts that we have been going over and over again since the 70s, they don't seem to land. There are 7 million inhabitants in the world, but this 7,000 million require certain things. We need home, we need to feed, we need to transport. But how is it that these needs will be covered? What development model must we follow? And this question is known by all of you. We need to develop as an industrialized country so that we have a house for everyone. And we should develop so that everyone should have enough to eat. And what does that mean? Reaching obesity levels, for example, that is suffered in the United States or Mexico, where we have calories but we don't have nutrients. The thing is, if we all wanted to develop as industrialized countries, we need 3, 4, or 5 Earths that will give us the resources necessary to sustain this growth. Based on this, in Rio Plus 20 in June 2012, the previous year, there was a document that is far from being the best document ever. It is a contradictory, ambiguous document full of gray zones. The 192 countries which are members of the international community, we adopted it as a commitment formula, which implied that it isn't the best document possible, but it is the only available document. It's that or nothing. So with the white or black formula, we adopt documents that are not satisfying, but it is what it is, and we need to work on that towards the future. But it is a future that never comes. We need to solve something, and that something may be that will reach us beforehand. The final document is called The Future That We Want. It's quite utopic, the future that we want. On the third point, it talks about green economy in a specific context, which is the sustainable development and the eradication of poverty. For countries in development, this is very important, both subjects, with the 3 basic pillars that Carlos talked to us about: economic, environmental, and social. And of course, the priority of eradicating poverty. If we are talking about Mexico, China, India, where there are emerging economies, but we are growing. But it is necessary that this growth is sustainable in order to balance our economic accounts in the most sustainable way possible. In this graph, I insist, you know this very well. This is about balance, and that in the center we can find sustainability, integrity, environmental integrity that hasn't been achieved. And this is funny because in international law and international forums, specialists create 2 things: documents that probably say nothing or don't say much, and creating meetings to analyze why we haven't gone forth. So in this ideal of creating documents, we create concepts as well. We create sustainable growth since 1992 from Rio. And in Rio Plus 20, we have sustainable growth again. And now we are talking about green growth / green economy. Carlos told us that this isn't a sole concept. We don't know what green economy actually is, and we don't know which are the basic elements. We assume them, of course, but sometimes there are organizations that will talk about green growth or green economy. We don't know if it's growth or economy. But this is to create a balance between these two basic elements, economies, society, and environment. And you know perfectly that the economics are a science of limited resources. If we had limitless gold, it wouldn't be valuable. Everyone would be able to access it. But what happens with water and air? Water, for example, several decades ago, bottled with water would be absurd. Beer and sodas, yes, but now we have water in bottles because it is a limited resource. It's a scarce resource. Air has become a scarce resource as well, and if we continue with that development level, everything will be scarcer. This leads us to talking about changing the paradigm of development. What is that? Each one of us has a life objective. What do we want to be tomorrow? Do we want to have a better job? Do we want to have a better home? Do we wish to have better nutrition? All these are basic elements, and of course each human being is able to aspire towards them. And as a country, what do we need to have? We want to have a greater GNP, we want to be wealthier, we want to distribute this wealth in a more adequate way. But what happens, we use deforestation and then sell the wood, and this makes us wealthier because and then we lose the ecosystem, and the ecosystem will not be able to be regenerated. In the short term, we would then become poor. We exploit schools of fish. We will be able to eat, but the next generations won't have anything to fish for. And then we have sorry accidents that lead to bad productivity in the sea. The preceding generations and next generations will inherit all this pollution in all the media we were talking about. The first bullet point is quite known by you. Environmental deterioration is persistence, and ecosystem which support life are increasing pressure. There's social inequality that continues. It isn't even necessary to explain that, but this affects the most vulnerable social classes. You know that very good in Mexico from the hurricane last week, the past weeks. The most vulnerable people are the ones that lose their heritage in the most immediate way, and their capacity of resilience is hard. That's harder to stop than in other social classes. And then this next bullet, consumption and production models. I assume you all have cell phones. Some of you are using them to take pictures at the moment. What is the useful life cycle of a cell phone? But why is it that every 6 months or every year we change a cell phone? Because the plan is really good, because you want to have the last WhatsApp, the iPhone 5S, and belong to a social group that you will be admitted to if you have those kinds of gadgets. Then that cell phone will go to the trash with everything that it implies. And this is one of many examples that the same things happens with clothes. Why do we need to change from our fashion? Because the people who sell it, that's convenient for them. And everything will go to the trash, and they will just be a jewel for the archaeologists of the future, because they will see the kind of waste we had, and will be a case for analysis for the archaeologists in the future, if there's still any people around. For a society, it is necessary to build the vision of a society and the distinctive features. There are 193 countries. Out of these countries, it's not the same: USA, China, El Salvador, Haiti, Mexico. There's controversies internationally. There's a principle that talks about responsibilities, where we are all responsible for the pollution generated, but we have different capacities to face them. Therefore, it is clear from the example in Korea or in Mexico, the capabilities we have are different to face than those countries who have less advantages. Now, different international organisms talk. We talked about Rio +20, which is an international organism. We talk about this with PNUMA. They created studies, public studies, where we can see about green economy and the dichotomy of concepts. And on the other hand, they talk about green growth. The OCDE, the OCDE, Mexico belongs since 1994 to the OCDE, but it is known as an organization where developed economies belong, not developing economies. Some of them are there by choice, like Brazil or China, but PNUMA is by choice. That explains the matter of the concept dichotomy. 193 countries that are very opposite between each other. They don't want to talk about green growth, that it is associated to something that isn't sustainable. They prefer to talk about a green economy. But moreover, green economy / green growth is what we are talking about, and several institutions are talking about. We will talk about this further on. The National Development Plan, we now have very concrete measures as to what is known as green growth, inclusive green growth. We are specialists in creating concepts that are hard to explain. Green growth that is inclusive, everyone can define it as they may, that preserves our natural heritage while generating wealth, competitiveness, and employment. We have an objective and a strategy that to implement a comprehensive policy for development that links environmental sustainability with costs and benefits to society. I'm not talking about anything new. The plan for development organized these words, and we need to give that content through legislation, of course, but through specific actions in order to have a prosperous Mexico, thriving Mexico. Everyone wants a thriving country, but in the practice, we know that's hard to achieve. These are the last slides, and then we will close the presentation. We are talking about the challenges of green economy and the opportunities of green economy. We sometimes talk about environmental crisis, economic crisis, food crisis. It is really just one crisis. I have lived in a world in crisis always. One ends, another one begins, but it's just the same one that goes up and down. It's a systemic crisis. It's a civilization crisis that has several ends, such as energetic, environmental, etc. We are using hydrocarbons for. We will not have cheap gas anymore. We will have to buy them at the price that they are offered to. There isn't a definition. We are talking about an evolving concept, which every country keeps nurturing. This third bullet point isn't news for you. Economic interests, in spite of the opposite rhetoric, prevail over the environmental. Every speech says that environmental and social issues are at the same level that economic issues, but we know that actually the strong sectoral interests with a fragmented vision do prevail over. If you analyze each issue that is in front of us, you can see what are the different economic and environmental that will lead to the other. We are also talking about a complex interinstitutional coordination, which makes it difficult to overcome inertia. We need to negotiate as a country, and how do we reach this? Everyone who talks isn't talking in the name of the Ministry of Energy. They are talking in the name of Mexico, of the inhabitants in Mexico. We need something that will balance out the economic and environmental subjects, and that sooner or later one of these will lose. And for the last two slides, the opportunities of green economy, the change in the development paradigm will happen. We cannot keep exploiting the earth as we have been doing it. We either change this or there will not be an earth with enough resources to sustain the human race. The patterns of production and consumption need to change. We must strengthen the actions between the different levels of government, federal, state, and municipal. How do we manage international matters that you are familiar with? Go through other branches, just such as the legislative and the judicial. How do we get them to impact the federal, the state, and the municipal? There's few knowledge. Generally, there are certain places where the treaties and the agreements are well known. However, there's other sectors where they are non-existent and nobody knows about them. And of course, the link to the key players such as the citizens and the private sector and others. And this must be the last one. The promotion between the forums I was talking about and international organisms. We talk PN, MUA, we mentioned OCDE, the World Bank, the Global Institute of Green Growth in Korea, and the Global Forum on Green Growth, 3GF. Mexico belongs to all of them. To all of them. To the triple GF and triple GI. Actually, Mexico is a key player with Korea and with Denmark. I insist. These are new institutions, but we need to go to concrete actions relatively quick. And at last, financial incentives, technological, and the growth of capabilities. Carlos mentioned this, Korea and others. We have a certain level of capabilities and we can perform certain number of activities, but there are other countries in the world that beyond the speech, they can do nothing. But they need a strong international support. Mexico can, we can enable this, but actions as an emerging economy that correspond to us are necessary for this global impact. Thank you very much. I want to thank Mr. Godinez for his intervention. We have about 10 minutes for Q&As. If you please identify yourself and direct your question to a speaker, please. My name is Walter. This is a question for the last speaker. You talk about a paradigm shift and the issues that we are living with the actual paradigm, the current paradigm. But we don't know yet what the paradigm is, because it seems like the paradigm goes against what we now have as comfort today. I don't know if you can talk about this, or is there really not an idea of how this paradigm should be? Thank you. There are elements. The paradigm that we have nowadays isn't functional, and that is recognized widely. It is mentioned, what you read has been mentioned, but what corresponds to us from the institutions that have performed the studies is to develop the next step. Mexico and many other countries in the world are walking blindly towards it, and we want to walk somewhere else, but there's strong interests in there. This is clear. If the energy source can no longer be hydrocarbons, how can we change this? The oil industry that produces this type of goods need to change. Basic elements in this study have been developed, are being developed through sectoral changes in climate change matter. There is a strategy that is going on today for a special program on climate change that deals with certain matters, so that could be green growth and economic growth, to have these concepts for development. I wish to give you more elements, but this isn't just on the Ministry of External Relations. We need to coordinate so that the dependencies, all the dependencies, can give us the necessary elements to state what the new paradigm is that cannot be fully domestic. Even if Mexico wished to switch their energy matrix, that would imply that our goods would be more expensive and we would not be competitive. It has to be a global paradigm shift. Imagine China changing globally a paradigm, losing employment and eradicating poverty. This is a difficult question, but that's all I can tell you. I wish to mention that this paradigm, we know what kind of future we don't want. We know that. And we know where we should be going. And this paradigm that is in everyone's subconscious is the efficiency. We need to be more efficient with our tasks, with what we are doing, be harmonized with nature. This is the vision of humans at an international level. There are other elements, of course, political, commercial, that try to lead humanity towards a path that will reduce the speed of growth towards that future that we want, but that we can't define. We know that we can describe it, but we don't know where to go. So what I mentioned in my presentation is that in some cases in this international environment, we need to be more pragmatical. We need to go step by step and try to seek common concepts that will represent our ideal and to delete the taxonomics issues when we talk about resource efficiency. I think we can all coincide and we can start from there and start moving forward. When all the different key political players will merge in a certain direction. I think we have time for one more question, maybe? Ladies first or hands first? Okay, we're going to allow both your questions if we are very concrete in the question and in the answer. Thank you very much. And I come from the Autonomous University of the State of Mexico. Mr. Chanovi, you mentioned the growth indicators for Latin America, but you didn't say how Mexico performed, and I don't think that everything is bad news. I think there are important actions, and we start to look at the links between the government and the academic institutions. There are good projects and good actions that are taking place. Not everything is bad news. And I would like to know how we performed in those indicators. If you could give us a small summary, please. Brief, right? The thing is, we don't measure. The indicators weren't comparative. Mexico came out as it wanted to. We defined a path, a route, and we set a direction. There are positive actions, of course, in environmental matters, productivity, economic productivity. Our intention was to communicate that the growth needs to be holistic for all four directions. We never thought to make a comparative charge, because if we had done that, we couldn't have done anything. Because we all have in that subconscious our future. We don't want to be measured, and we don't want to measure anyone. Each country has its own indicators. There is a roadmap where we will have the objectives, we will improve towards that direction that by definition, maybe we're going there. Maybe we are dodging the future that we don't want. So now the last question, please, gentlemen. Mexico accomplished the goal. The question is, if we want to shift paradigms, how can we not compromise the sustainable world? for the next generations? How can we stop thinking about increasing the production of oil, exploiting oil? If we need 1.8 billion oil barrels, why do we want to increase? Why don't we want to increase the oil? Why keep on track on exploiting a natural resource that is scarce? That's a mistake. And the risk of the oil going to the private sector, I know that's different, but I think in this paradigm shift we are mistaken. This is a resource that we shouldn't be exploiting, definitely. Several amnesties propose this exactly the opposite. And that has to do with climate change. We are going through the specific units that shouldn't be 2 degrees centigrade, the temperature of the globe. It shouldn't go over that, and we are currently going over that number. Who is exploiting this? If it's private, if it's public? Certainly, our energy should remain where they are, which is in the soil, in the ground, in order to prevent these changes in temperature. But what is clear is that by unit, oil can generate a cheaper energy compared to renewable energies. There isn't a competitive energy for renewable sources like Mexico. It is an economical matter based on that, and you have said that the goal has been accomplished. I didn't understand that, but there are concrete actions that need to be taken care of before talking about the exploitation of oil. Very well. Thank you very much. We thank Dr. Chandovi and Dr. Godinez for their brilliant interventions. The subject, of course, requires a lot more time. There will be a lot more forums like these for this subject. So an applause, please. Let me hand you a couple of gifts as a thank you.